So we are recording, and the last thing I'm going to ask from you is to start off, just say your name and then about a sentence about what you do.
Okay. All right. My name is John Ronnie Nix. I'm a 72-year-old fourth generation farmer. I'm a engineer by trade. I'm an agricultural engineer, a graduate from Kansas State University. I currently run a 80-acre cattle farm, which was started by my granddad in 1904. So I'm a fourth generation cattleman. I am a horseman. I love outdoors, and I love serving people. I serve on several citizens advisory boards, including rural concerns, climate action, and I serve on the advisory board for FAMU University.
Was getting fall involved in your grandfather's farm something you knew you wanted to do from a young age?
It was. From a young age, we ran about 300 head of cattle in the woods. I was taken with my granddad when he would travel around to the different herds. I would ride on the back of the horse with him, and he would explain to me where people used to live when these were homesteads. So as we traveled around to feed our cattle and feed our hogs, he would tell me about uh, black people that lived in these areas of the woods before they were sold to the paper company. So it was a history lesson. So I always kind of fell in love with that. And I fell in love with understanding how cattle worked and why they moved around. And so as I grew and got my own horse, I became in charge of checking fence and making sure that everything was in order on the farm.
And how has that farm been something that it was passed down to you, and now how is that something that you're passing on to the future generations?
Well, our farm is still air property, but the management of our operation was passed on to me from my uncles. And I'm working right now with my grandson, and we have several articles that been published on the Farm and Family magazine about our legacy. And I'd love to have you share that. And I have copies of that magazine here. But I feel that I have an obligation, as I mentioned before, to make sure that um, the legacy of the farm and the legacy of the agriculture stays in the family. So I've been working with my grandson and explaining to him the value of the farm. It's not just a widget that you can take money from. It has to have a personal impact. And if it isn't part of you, then it becomes a widget and you can sell it. I'm trying to make sure that he understands that it's a legacy, it's something that's more than money. And because of that, it won't be sold because it's a part of your history and a part of your life.
I think it's really powerful the importance that you're trying to pass on to your son and your grandson of keeping that farm and keeping not just the land and the buildings but the passion behind it,
Right.
because historically speaking, it's an understatement, but it hasn't always been easy to be a black farmer, right?
Exactly. It hasn't.
How has your family owning that farm since 1908, what has that struggle looked like when it comes to being disenfranchised or trying to overcome challenges that you face as a black farmer?
My grandfather and grandmother had 11 kids, and my mom was a school teacher. They believed in having land and having an education. Out of the 11 kids, three of the daughters, it was seven uh, daughters and four boys. Out of the seven girls, four of them were teachers, and and the uh, and the boys worked on the farm. But there was a struggle because of the financial liability of trying to pay of trying to pay the taxes and trying to make a living on the farm. So um, three of the boys went off to work on jobs outside the farm to support the farm, and they would send money back to their to their parents to operate the farm. But they would all kind of come back once or twice a year to work the farm during harvest time. So they always had that connection to the farm, even though they had to work outside jobs in order to support the farm, because the farm was the catalyst that kept the family together. And we had a cattle industry where they still own part of the cattle. So they would come back to make sure that the fencing was done, and that the harvest of the corn for the cattle was taken care of.
I think one of the ways that black farmers have been disparaged is simply through history. It's that the history and importance of black farmers is not something that is taught often in schools. It's something that is often ignored by schools. How important are events like the one that we had today to you when it comes to reclaiming that history and retelling that story?
I think one of the things as I talk to people about black farms and black farmers, they would in history they would say black farmers didn't make a lot of money, but they were the most important person in the community. And the reason was because they were independent. They had their own land, they could grow their own food, and they had education they had a skill that allowed them to not have to work for someone. I talk about, in my talks, I talk about the 40 acres and a mule that was promised and never given. The reason, instead of doing that, the government decided it got so much protest about giving that away. And when President Lincoln was killed, it was his idea. And then the uh, they didn't do it because of so much protest. So instead, as we moved from slavery, they did what's called the wage. So now you get paid a wage, but that was a minimum wage for black people. So the old cliche, teach a man how to fish and he'll have food forever. So instead of giving us land, they gave us wages. And I think that the black farmer is an example of what can happen if you had your own land. Uh, and they society knew this, so they did a lot to remove black farms. In the 1930s, there were 900,000 black farmers. Now, in 2023, 2024, according to the census, there's only 44,000 in the United States. We moved from 15% of the farms to now 0.5% of the farms. So we're losing in terms of independence and losing in terms of what was considered important, land and education.
Another thing that you do and that you mentioned and touched on earlier is you work in energy conservation.
Yes.
When it comes to energy, obviously here in Gainesville you have GRU and you have an energy grid that's deeply connected with a lot of different fields. What exactly to you does it mean when you say you work in energy conservation? What does that work look like?
I worked for 35 years with a utility company in South Florida. The utility company was actually Florida Power and Light. And in that, I worked as an energy conservation specialist. And what that means is that we find ways in which to conserve energy. And we do it in three different avenues. One is we replace old equipment with energy efficient equipment. Two, we did we change the way we use that equipment. We learn how to use it in a conservative way. And then three, we modify the grid so that generating the electricity is done uh, in a way that doesn't hurt the environment, and it conserves oil, gas, and electricity.
Well, here in Gainesville, a lot of our energy comes from a biofuel plant. It comes from natural gas. When we look towards the future and talk about wanting to reduce emissions, what more do you think needs to be done?
Well, GRU is in a state of flux right now in terms of who's governing it. Uh, what needs to be done is, yes, uh, we have the bio plant. Um, and I have mixed emotions about that because it destroys trees. They were going to not when it was introduced, they were going to use refuge from cutting the trees and then using the tops and burning them. Well, that didn't give them enough, so they ended up taking out oak trees, and that wasn't production oriented. They couldn't commercially sell them, so they chipped them up, and they used that in the plant. Um, so I have mixed emotions about the impact of using wood for generating electricity. However, I do think that we should be looking at solar, and I think that's the future. And GRU right now has decided that solar isn't cost effective for them. So, as part of the climate change advisory board that I've been the chair of or been a part of for the last 6 years, we know that we can't make our goal that the county has set for 2035 without GRU converting to solar. So we're in a flux right now as GRU management decides what they're going to do. Uh, so the bio plan is great, but we still need them to be more committed toward doing solar in order for us to meet our CO2 goal by 2035.
Well, Alachua recently came out in Gainesville with a climate action plan. That was something that, is a work and an effort here on a local level to get climate activism done. Do you see climate action plans like those as a model potentially for the future?
My committee, in which I currently I chaired for a couple of years, but now I'm the vice chair. Uh, we put that we initiate we became the people that review that, the committee that reviews that and give recommendations to the joint city county commissioners that are in charge of that plan. It's 9 parts to that plan. Some of the overlying things is that we want equity and we want communication. We want people to know what's in the plan, and we want the plan to be able to express diversity and equity so that the people that need the most get the most. So when we look at the plan and we look at the strategicness of implementing uh, things, we are looking at it from an equity standpoint and we're looking at it from a communication standpoint. So I do think the plan has 9 parts. I think that the plan is strategic. I think that there's commitment uh, by the county, and I'm hoping that the city, which GRU reports to, can get aboard a little bit more.
One of the things that I've spoken to people about before is the idea of it's really easy for city officials to say that they have a plan. It's really easy for them to say, okay, here's what we're going to do. But it's another story in trying to get them to actually do it. Do you think, as everyday citizens, there's a way that we can ensure that plans like the climate action plan actually get seen through?
Yes, I think it, as I mentioned before, some of the foundations for implementing any policy is for the general public to know what that policy is. So this strategic plan is probably about 80 pages. So, but what we're doing is that we are breaking that down into small pieces, and we're actually having students to summarize it. And we're communicating that to other committees. So what we're doing is we're getting other climate action committees involved so that we can get their review and see it from their standpoint also. So I do think that by people knowing what's in the plan, they can hold the city accountable to making the city and the county joint committee of making it accountable for doing what the plan says and having the plan have the right actions in it.
Well, for everyday people, what does climate action look like to them? And let's
So,
just say,
so when I explain climate action to community people, I talk to them about extremes. So climate action is just how you become resilient in extremes. And no one can doubt that we are in situations where we see more heat, we see more coldness at one spot, so we see more rainfall at one time. So we're getting these extremes. So the climate action plan is a plan on how to be resilient in extremes. And there's no more people that are impacted more than people that live in communities or have wages that's below the average wage. So if you have money, a lot of times you can dilute the impact of an extreme. But when you don't have the facilities or the resources, the extremes have a more impact on you. So that's how I get people's attention about what you should be doing and what you can be doing to reduce the impact of these extremes.
well, climate action and climate activism isn't always easy. How do you approach and how do you speak to people who might be more skeptical about climate change?
Well, what people say is that it's a cycle. But what I say, maybe it's a cycle, but what we're talking about is how to reduce the impact of those cycles. The problem that we have is that we have more people. So now we have more people. So the impact of those climate things on people are more because we have more people being impacted by it. One of our big ones here is sea rise. So what we have to worry about, even though we're not on the coast, we one of the things that we have in our strategic plan is how do we handle the influx of climate mitigation of climate migration into our area, into Central Florida. So that is one of the things that we have in that plan.
Well, let's say 50 years down the line, what kind of impacts do you hope that your work has?
I hope that the strategic plan will have an impact of two things. One, generating an interest so that we can do solar and we can reduce our impact on gas and and more electric vehicles, more electric in our homes, more solar use. I'm hoping that also, secondly, that people become more in tune to nature and what it's doing to the environment. And we can do things like uh, reduce the climate CO2 in our air by using the right kind of plants, using nature. As I mentioned, I'm a fourth generation farmer, and what I do is I grow grass. And pastures and grass are one of the biggest uh, sinks and soil for pulling carbon out of the air and putting oxygen into the air. So I'm hoping that as we move into the future, that we learn how to use nature and we learn how to not have such a big impact by using the wrong fossil fuels and how to use nature to make the environment a part that helps us more in climate mitigation.
If you could describe your work in a metaphor, what would that be?
I would think it would be more like an eagle looking at the land and figuring out how, from a big picture standpoint, what we can do to make it a better place and preserve it. I would think that I would be looking at not only what to do, but the impact of what we do. As I look down below, I would say we need to work more here because I can see a big picture here, or I can see a hole here. So because I'm so far up in the air and I can see what's it doing, uh, I can plug it up, and we can get this person to move over here, and we can get that person to move over there, so that as we look at what we can do to make everything fit together, I can see where we need to put the work in.
Has there been a piece of advice that you've received over the years that really sparked your passion for wanting to be involved in climate change and climate issues?
One of the things that I believe in is team. I think that climate issues requires everybody. So team together, everyone accomplishes more. And I think that that is a phrase that we have to use in climate mitigation, because without everyone working together as a team, we can't make it work.
Well, for a lot of people right now, we're in a time where people maybe don't feel as optimistic and don't feel as hopeful looking to the future when it comes to protecting our environment and addressing climate change. What gives you hope for the future?
I think education, communication, and looking at the data, looking at what the earth, how it's heating up, looking at the data, knowing that it's just not something that we're making up. The data is saying that we need to change. And the data is saying if we don't change, here's what's going to happen. So I think as people communicate, as people become more educated, as people start looking at what the extremes are, and how our earth is changing, it will make people be willing to change some of the ways that they go about their daily life, because they're looking at the future and the future of their kids.
Well, speaking of the future of people's children, a lot of people say that for young people, they're going to be the ones who are inheriting the consequences of our action now. For young people who are passionate about climate change and want to get involved, but what's your message to them?
Start doing the easy things. Start at your home. Start conserving. Remember, I said it's three things. It's conservation, it's energy replacement of parts, and it's energy generation. So one of the things that we can do is conserve in the way that we use electricity, water, and gas now. One of my jobs when I first came back to Gainesville was to work in our schools as the energy conservation engineer. And I went into our schools because our schools were old buildings in Alachua County. And we learned how to conserve electricity for what we had. There was many times that we couldn't conserve because of the way the equipment was. So we figured out when was the best time to replace this equipment so that we could start to conserve. So there's three ways we can do it. We can replace old equipment with energy efficient equipment. We can conserve the way that we use electricity in our homes and our businesses. And then we can motivate our electric company to generate its electricity in a conservational way that does not disturb our environment. So what I would do is I would tell people to start where you are. Do what you can. Turn your lights off when you're not using them. Make sure that maybe you convert your gas to electricity. Make sure that you replace old equipment with new equipment, and make sure energy efficient equipment, to make sure that you're not wasting electricity in order to get some of the comfort that you need.
Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to say or anything you maybe feel like you haven't gotten the chance to talk about yet?
Well, I would just like to say that I'm an optimist. I just like to say that I think that we're going to be able to conquer this. I think that the younger generation are understanding that there is climate change, that our climate and that our earth is changing. And in order to make sure that it stays, they will have to change the way that they're doing things. And I believe that technology will also make a difference. And I believe that as we learn more, we become better.
Well, thank you so much.